I want to thank you for joining, and this is in part as a preparation for my return to session. We'll be reconvening in the Senate the day after Labor Day, so I'm headed back to Washington, D.C. And as you know, for months now, we have heard from local governments about the fact that you're on the front lines in the fight against COVID-19. And that means covering a lot of unanticipated expenses to respond to the pandemic, to provide a lifeline literally to families and businesses, helping to keep businesses afloat, helping to keep renters in their homes. But we also know that you can't do it alone. And so back in March, as everyone on this call knows, the Congress passed the CARES Act, which included support for state and localities, and in particular for the essential workers that were on the front line. The CARES Act was certainly a start. It wasn't enough, however. And in recent weeks, we have seen the situation in Wisconsin with regard to the pandemic and COVID-19 actually get worse rather than better. I think when the CARES Act was passed, there was some hope that we would corral this illness, or at least be able to significantly flatten the curve by the end of July. And in fact, that has not been the case. So as it continues, our frontline healthcare workers, first responders, continue not to have access to some of the PPE that they need to perform their jobs. And then we have schools that are preparing to reopen. And many of those units of local government also lack the support they need, whether they're going to be conducting classes virtually or in person or a hybrid of both. State and local budgets are really stretched thin. They have been year after year, but this is obviously an exceptional time. And so as we head back to Washington, D.C. next week, I'm going to push for immediate action on a relief package. The HEROES Act, which passed the House of Representatives on May 15th, provided $875 billion to state and local governments. And this time, the local government funding was not proposed to flow through the states, but actually be provided directly, which I know is always of interest to local leaders. And they also included, especially for those of you, you know, in the more northern reaches of the state, it also provided $20 billion for tribal governments who are experiencing very similar situations as cities and counties and other local communities, local units of government are. But the president announced his opposition to the HEROES Act, and has also, in the negotiations that followed before we broke for the August recess, he also has specifically opposed funding for states and local governments, having nevertheless delegated almost all of the lead authority in fighting this pandemic to states and local governments. Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Senate, has refused to bring up the HEROES Act and has not put forward a meaningful proposal for an alternative to be considered by the Senate. You know, the Democrats in the Senate, not to be too partisan, but that's just the reality we're facing right now, really have strong support for providing state, local, and tribal relief. Because we know that the alternative may be indeed to lay off essential workers, first responders. So it's past time that the Senate take action. And I'm really glad that you were able to convene with me today to provide greater information to fuel the arguments that I'll be making when I return. And so now I'd like to turn over the call to Mayor Genrich of Green Bay.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. Thanks so much for having us to have this conversation with you. And I just want people to know that this is not the first conversation that Senator Baldwin has had with me and with other local government leaders. Really appreciate the fact that you've been checking in with me regularly to see how things are going in Green Bay and to see what we need. And, you know, the policies that you're advocating for in Washington would be hugely helpful for Green Bay and Brown County and all local government leaders in Wisconsin. So just really want to appreciate all of the work that you've been engaged in over the last few months. In terms of what we need, you know, what's being proposed by Senator Baldwin and other Senate Democrats and what's on the table in Washington, you know, I've said from the beginning that what this requires is really a massive effort on the part of our federal government to meet the not only health needs, of course, of our citizens in this country, but the social and economic needs and deficits that we're facing here. So I think, you know, people are pretty well aware of the health impacts, of course, of COVID, but we are seeing some very significant fiscal impacts at the local government level. And one thing to note for those listening or watching, the CARES Act was hugely helpful for states and local units of government. But one thing that it did not do is allow us to meet our fiscal shortfalls, use those CARES dollars to meet shortfalls in revenue. And we've seen a lot of that play out in our city here. So substantial reductions in room tax revenue that's coming in, of course, because people are not traveling and not staying in hotels. So room tax revenue is off in 2020 projections at $240,000. Our parking division is estimating a $700,000 reduction in revenue. Bay Beach, our amusement park, which is adored by everybody here in Green Bay, but you know, folks around the state and country, unfortunately, revenues there are off $1.5 million. And again, you know, we're not able to use that CARES money to meet those shortfalls. And so we're kind of limping through 2020, you know, moving away from putting some funds toward needed capital improvements in the future in order to meet those gaps. But these needs are only going to increase in 2021 and beyond if we're not given some substantial support from the federal government in the form of the HEROES Act or something similar. Also just wanted to note that, especially for the Green Bay area, you know, this is a severe economic impact because of the fact that COVID has forced the NFL and forced the Packers to continue on, but without fans. So to put things in perspective for people, the economic impact is estimated to be about $15 million per home game, per Packers home game. So of course we're losing that. This season, the annual impact is in the neighborhood of $160 million per year. And so I think it's important to have that number at hand when people say, oh, the HEROES Act is too generous, right? I mean, it's in the neighborhood, I think, of around $70 million for the city of Green Bay. But when you note that $160 million is being pulled out just from the simple fact that the Packers aren't going to be having games with fans this year, it really puts things in perspective and I think makes clear that we really do need this sizable investment on the part of our federal government to stand us up and, more importantly, to support our citizens who are many of whom without employment. You know, our unemployment rate is right near 9%, about 2.5 times what we saw right before the COVID outbreak. And so that's in the neighborhood of nearly 20,000 people who are out of work here in the Green Bay area and in desperate need of support. So again, just very thankful that Senator Baldwin is bringing us together, is advocating for the policies that we really think are necessary in Washington. And also wanted to thank her and other sponsors of the Jobs for Economic Recovery Act. One thing that we were hoping to do with the CARES dollars is to start up a conservation corps in the city of Green Bay, provide a bit of a jobs program for those who have been displaced and looking for work. It's been really difficult to work, just very frankly, difficult to work through HUD's rules and regulations, the strings that are attached to those CARES dollars, and would just be incredibly impactful for our residents and for our city to be able to put in place a jobs program of this type. And I think the Jobs for Economic Recovery Act plus HEROES Act, would really go a long way to enabling us to put people to work and to improve our community. So that's what I have for you in terms of introductory remarks. Really looking forward to the discussion today. And thanks again to Senator Baldwin for having us.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Mayor Cabot to make some comments.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, I would also thank Senator Baldwin for bringing us together. And I would echo much of the mayor's words as far as appreciate you checking in with us in La Crosse and just the ongoing efforts to try to address the challenges that we're all facing. And I would again provide maybe some very similar La Crosse examples. In March and April when the pandemic hit and the economic shutdown happened, for us, again, the CARES Act funds were helpful for those additional costs that we experienced to deal with the April election, for example, and to try to keep people safe and to do the purchasing of the PP&E and all that. It doesn't allow for revenue replacement, and that's our biggest struggle right now. We lost about 13% of our non-tax levy revenue this year. So as Mayor Eric talked about, just trying to limp along and get through this year, it's a very similar situation here in La Crosse. Between reducing positions, furloughing, and freezing positions, I mean, it's more than, I believe it's about 35 positions that have been impacted here in La Crosse out of our workforce, and kind of across the board. So it's been public safety, it's been police and fire, it's been our parks and recreation, our civic center, our library staff. So, it has had impacts to both public safety and quality of life issues. And, for us, we strongly urge and we appreciate your support, Senator, in pushing for federal assistance and relief to try to really just make us whole. I mean, I do think it would be very critical for us to plug those revenue gaps that we've experienced. 2021, we're putting together our budget now for next year, and that's really not looking any better. As Mayor Eric talked about, the loss of room taxes and just licenses and permit fees and those things, it really is having a significant impact. And for us, like all the local governments, most of our budget is personnel. So if we are having to make reductions, that's reductions in personnel. And we're doing everything we can to avoid reducing police and fire and our streets and those public safety positions. But the reality is we're having to make those tough choices in those departments as well. So I think for us, just to really maybe kind of summarize, I mean, I think the initial CARES funding was positive, it was helpful, but we really need to be made whole when it comes to our revenues. We have done some very creative things here at the local level. I think here in La Crosse, we very quickly, we knew that the impact of the shutdown was going to be a massive negative thing for our businesses. We used our CARES funding and some of our own general funds to provide grants, very small grants in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $10,000 to about 60 of our local businesses, which helped to preserve over 1,000 jobs. And that was really to supplement what was going on at both the state and federal levels, whether it was the PPP or any of those other programs through the Small Business Administration or at the state level. But we just knew that there was going to be gaps, and folks were going to have either a hard time navigating some of those federal and state program guidelines or not be eligible. So we stepped up. We've been really, again, trying to work creatively with our businesses, our nonprofits, our citizens to, still maintain service levels. And to do that with less revenue is difficult, if not impossible. So we've heard about it through this year, through this summer, especially with the shutdown of pools and programs and libraries and park and rec facilities. Folks understand, obviously there's a pandemic, but there's also the expectation and the hope that there are some things at the local level we can still do and still provide to keep some sense of normalcy. So I just really appreciate your effort, Senator, and again from the West Coast here, appreciate all you can do to help us. So thank you.
Chairman Gibbs, will you get to go next?
Well, thank you, Senator, and I like the other speakers and guests, want to thank you for all your efforts, not only for the efforts that you're putting forth today, but all the efforts that you've made in the prior pieces of legislation, and including the CARES Act. As I think some of the other individuals have clearly stated, the CARES Act was instrumental in being able to provide some needed resources to provide some of those services. The one caveat to that is some of the restrictions that the CARES Act funding, as it flowed through the state to the counties, does not allow for loss of revenue, and then doesn't allow for the use, and when you lose revenue, obviously that, and if that money is not allowed to be utilized there, that means that either the county makes decisions to utilize reserves or reduce services to its citizens, and because we end up not laying off people, but we put in a hiring freeze or a replacement freeze, in fact, in the county, where we're not hiring any replacements as people retire. We put a hiring freeze on to look at the projected gap that we have in loss of revenue and increased costs of almost $5.2 million in Marathon County. As the Senator, you're quite well aware, Wisconsin's very unique in that Wisconsin, the state of Wisconsin, does not have a transportation division at the state level, and the counties are charged with the responsibility of maintaining infrastructure throughout the state, including the county highways, the state roads, and the interstate systems. So when our resources are stretched, some of those levels of services that are provided there are also cut. The demands that that the county is receiving on its health department, as you're well aware, with the pandemic is huge. And so the struggle is that we're getting through this year by not replacing individuals as they retire and using up reserves. That makes a huge, is going to be a huge impact come next year. Looking at the budgets, we're already projecting the county does have the 0.5% sales tax in Marathon County, and that does account for roughly $13 million of revenue to the county, and the current projections are anywhere from 8 to 14% reduction in that moving forward. So that's a $1.5 to $2 million hole that we're looking at next year. We're also looking at fees being down in the county, in some of the amenities that we provide through the parks and the boat ramps, but there also is a projection of a loss in collections and in property tax come next year. When we looked historically back at the recession of 2008, the property tax collections did not suffer the immediate year that the recession hit, but the subsequent years. And so the subsequent years, meaning 2021's budget, is looking potentially like another budget shortfall. So, I also am fortunate enough to serve on the National Counties Association Board of Directors, and the National Counties Association did a preliminary estimate for the 3,069 counties in the United States, and the estimated revenue shortfalls and increase in expenditures at the county level is estimated at $2.2 billion. So again, I want to thank the Senator for all your efforts, and the story has to be told. We are on the front lines, as the Senator clearly explained at the beginning. The mayors and the counties and the townships are on the front line, serving the citizens of this country. And unfortunately, when our revenues, with the limits that we are imposed on by the state, don't allow us to shift those costs or shift revenues when we see shortfalls. So I appreciate all of your efforts, and thank you.
So I'm going to go directly to Kim Kohlhaas. The AFT is very much on our minds as the school year is about to begin. And so, Kim, if you can give us an update.
Hey, good morning. And I'm on my telephone, so please let me know if I've got technical difficulties, because that would definitely be on my end. And I just want to say thank you to the Senator for listening. These stories are real. What's happening in our communities is real. And to the three gentlemen that spoke earlier with your positions, I took more notes than what I wanted to speak on, because these stories just continue. Every aspect of our system is struggling, and the schools are no different. Our budgets reflect our priorities, and without funding to support schools reopening, it definitely doesn't feel like it's a priority. It doesn't feel like the safety of our students and our staff is a priority. We have a lot of families that are very scared because the unknowns are pretty significant. Right now, we know that the governor has put in a mandatory mask mandate so that students will be wearing masks in the schools. The schools have thermometers, and that DPI and the governor have put out guidelines. But beyond that, we don't have strong plans and the resources to implement plans. So every day things change. It's constantly unknown. And although everybody in the school system is doing the best that they can to make decisions, it really comes down to which bad decision are we going to make? And that's because we have a lack of funding. The protective equipment, we don't know how much we're going to have. Plexiglass, we don't know how much we're going to have. If kids get sick, we're not sure what the plan is if they get sick while they're at school. One school district is going to set up a quarantine room. So if a child starts to develop symptoms during the day, they will go to that quarantine room. But then if any other children in the building start to develop symptoms, they cannot go to that quarantine room until that child has left with his parents. So children are then being forced to stay in the classroom and exposing others. We want smaller class sizes, but that requires funding and teachers in order to provide those smaller class sizes. Even things as simple as taking bathroom breaks or walking down the hallway. All of those things are impacting the structures of our schools and what our children are doing. And the past several months, I've had many conversations with families and school board members and educators and support staff, and they're scared. Districts don't know how they're going to safely reopen schools. We have districts that have chosen to do all virtual, districts that have chosen to do no virtual learning until there's an outbreak, and some that are doing a hybrid. And those hybrids, because we're short-staffed, some teachers are doing in-person learning and doing virtual learning at the same time. So they're doing multiple jobs working with multiple students. Something as simple as being on the bus. Buses used to hold 75 children, and now we need to have additional resources to have less children on the bus in order to come to school. I've talked with parents who are really afraid for their kids' safety, and the only way that they can keep their children home with them to be safe is if they choose to quit their job in order to stay home and take care of their children. That's a tough situation for families to be in. I've spoken with educators who are in high-risk categories, who are feeling unsafe about going into the school because they know that their health and safety cannot be protected. I've talked to one teacher last week in Northwest Wisconsin, who she made the difficult decision to resign. She's been in the classroom for 30 years, and she has family members that are in a high-risk category. And she chose not to return to work this year because she was not comfortable with the safety measures that were put into place with their schools. We need to have additional funding in order to put in the protective measures that are needed in these schools. It's just that simple. It's really frustrating that we have to be so verbal and so strong in our advocacy around this. Because we know that this is necessary in order for our schools to continue to function. And so thank you for taking the time to hear our stories and to be an advocate for the work that we do.
Thank you. So Kim, I might, if it's okay, ask a couple follow-up questions of you, and I have some of the other panelists also. But one of the things I'm curious about, and I know it's hard to answer because we have so many different school districts, so we're not dealing with identical plans in different, in different parts of the state. But were teachers able to get any additional support over the summer to prepare for either hybrid or all online teaching? I know we had initially in March and April and May issues with students not having access to the type of high-speed broadband that they needed. But one of the things is it's teaching virtually is not the same as teaching in classrooms. And there's been a lot of discussion about the support, technological support and instructional support that teachers need to provide instruction virtually. Do you have any success stories about what was done this summer, or was nothing done this summer?
We have, because it's different at each district, it's difficult to make a universal statement regarding that. We have some districts that still do not have a laptop for each teacher to be able to teach virtually. We have districts that don't have Zoom accounts for their teachers. And then we have districts who have made the decision that they're going to start the school year virtually, and they look forward to when they can open up the workplace again and the physical schools. But they spent the summer working with teachers on professional development so that they were able to improve virtual learning, which is something that I think is really key, is the reality that we're going to have to be virtual at some point in the next few months. We need to work on improving that virtual world in addition to just being able to provide it. Last I heard, we still have 40,000 students that are unable to do virtual learning in Wisconsin. And that's one of the things that I'm super excited about with the tribal support, because a lot of those children are on the reservations and don't have access to virtual learning. So yeah, we're all over the board when it comes to the professional development of virtual instruction.
Thank you. Chairman Gibbs, Kurt, if you don't mind, you could call me Tammy. It's all.
By all means, Senator, absolutely.
you can call me Tammy, or you call me whatever. All right. I am interested in the sort of services that the county provides that may have there may have been increased need indirectly related to COVID-19, but whether you've been able to reach the same number of people. And what I'm thinking about is in the human services area of county responsibility. I'm thinking in particular about children's safety and drug and alcohol abuse services and mental health services that are through the county, because I do know that some of those things also occur through health facilities, and I've talked to a lot of them about telehealth, et cetera. But can you tell me, in terms of what the county manages, how you've been able to continue serving the people in Marathon County?
Thank you, Senator. Great question. Some of the social services that obviously that the county provides is some of the mental health and child protective services. And one of the struggles is that one of the reporting systems that we had for children in some cases in difficult situations was the school system. And so that's one of the challenges, and also the hospitals were also one of the reporting systems that provided us at least the initial assessment, and then the county would do the follow-up and do the investigation for those potential child protective cases. And so we have struggled, I don't know that the need has decreased, but I think one of the things that has been very, very unfortunate is the reporting mechanisms that we have that refer cases for investigation. Those have fallen to the wayside in some cases, and it also the investigations has been a real struggle when you have case managers trying to do interviews and follow-ups to those cases. They're having to do them virtually in some cases, and so the struggle has been, I'm very cognizant of, Kim, your plight in the broadband issue. Marathon County has taken on an initiative to try to expand broadband into the rural communities. Marathon County is considerably rural, although we have a population center that's metro, and half of the county's population is metro, and they have relatively stable access to broadband. The rural community is all over the place. And so the education system and the struggle. So we did have meetings with all of the school districts and the school administrators trying to come up with a plan to, and we had a comprehensive plan that will allow or could expand broadband. But you're right, Senator, the increase in need for the mental health has also been a challenge. North Central Healthcare, which is our mental health care provider in the county, which is a 3-county consortium. They have struggled also simply because of the lockdown. We also have in the main facility, we have a nursing home Marathon County's nursing home, and unfortunately, we've had several cases of COVID there. We have had, unfortunately, 3 individuals who've passed because of it. You know, those continue to be struggles, and so the services, although are not the same, we try to continue to provide those services, but I think in some cases the structure around the reporting mechanisms that we have for some of those safety nets are fallen by the wayside.
Okay. For I guess all of you in directly in government, have you had in terms of public health support from either state employed contract tracers or CDC field staff in your communities?
I'll respond first, Senator. The Marathon County has gone out and used some CARE dollars, CARES funding, to hire and train contact tracers directly through our health department. So we've increased our staff directly there. Yet there's direct funding to the health department through the CARES Act, but we're having to use some of the state's allocation to the county to also supplement that, supplement the increased need, because the increased need, when we're having an average of 8 to 10 additional cases each day, compounds itself. And so we have about 2 weeks ago, we had about 200 and some active cases in the county that we had contact tracers working on, but we're also adding to that 8 to 10 cases a day, and so that so we're still continuing to expand in our contact tracers, but they're all employees that are contracted through our health department.
Senator, I know in La Crosse County, they have done similar things that Marathon County was or has been doing, is to hire additional contact tracers. And I know that they have also utilized the state to help them with, because we've been in that situation, especially when we're seeing 20 and 30 cases a day. They can't keep up to do the tracing. I'm not aware if they've utilized any services from the CDC, but we could get that information for you.
Right, and from Green Bay's perspective, we don't directly oversee a health department, as you know, it's at the county level here.
Right.
I know that there has been some assistance from the federal government a couple months ago, rather, when we had our major outbreaks at our meat packing plants. CDC and OSHA and a few other federal agencies had a presence here. But one of our real struggles, just referencing the meat packing plant outbreaks, is the disconnect between maybe how city government and county government is responding and how that's being received in communities with significant language barriers. So there's just a lot that we need to do at the city level and at the county level, and additional assistance, additional financial assistance from the federal government would be hugely helpful in that regard.
Yeah, on that point of the language barriers, I remember learning in the Green Bay, one of the 2 meat packing facilities that was impacted, that there was one of the facilities where 28 separate languages were spoken. And I think about the issue of, you know, public health is a lot about communication, right? And to have trusted communicators who can also reach people with different language issues. I know certainly in Marathon County, you're dealing with Hmong population that needs to have specific translation, but also a trusted messenger. So those are all things that, you know, in the wake of all of this, well, we have to do it in real time, but we also, in the wake of all of this, think about how we build a stronger public health system moving forward. I wanted to return for a moment to the broadband issue, and maybe Kim, you have heard lots of anecdotal information, and I'm really hoping that school districts can help us refine our knowledge of where there are digital divides. And, you know, we think of it mostly as a rural issue because of the less dense population and running that last mile of fiber or getting cell coverage. Oftentimes, the barrier in urban areas is just the cost of, you know, I know my bundled package in Madison, you know, probably is equal to the first month's rent that I paid when I was 18 or 22 and got my first apartment, right? Now I do it every month just for the broadband and television and phone. But one, I just wanted to share, I'm not trying to tout somebody's product, but I did hear about something that was innovative for both urban and rural areas, that most school districts have a VPN, a virtual private network, and that if you have wireless, you can connect with that without having to do business with one of the providers. Because all you need is a connection to that VPN. And so the technology involved actually drones. I've heard elsewhere they do it with weather balloons, but to be able to lift the wireless connection in a community so it could reach all the students, but you don't have to pay that monthly fee for you know, whatever your local monopoly is. Sorry, I'm expressing too many opinions here, but some of those innovations are really interesting. They're not free, so I'm not sure how much school districts, you know, they're strapped to, but I do like the fact we've been thinking out of the box, and I know that many school districts, especially in urban areas, were filling the vacant buses with, you know, cell repeaters and things like that to get Wi-Fi and other wireless to neighborhoods. It's harder in rural areas, but anyways, lot of food for thought.
No, there has been a lot of very creative ways to make sure that students have access to it. And when we first went to virtual learning in the spring, we had over 100,000 students that did not have access for a variety of reasons, whether it's the technology or if it's access to broadband. Districts do have hotspots that they're giving out to families, and that works ideally if you have a small family. But if you have a large family with lots of children that are all trying to utilize the same hotspot, it's a very difficult video to follow with the skippiness of it. But we have been working very diligently with it, and we're trying to track down these 40,000 students to figure out what can we do to support you, because there are a lot of innovations now.
Yeah.
Yep.
I said this more as a comment than a question, but I'll Kim, you and I can follow up later. But I think that the school districts of the state could play a really valuable role in getting us the information we need about underserved and unserved areas. I'm on the Senate Commerce Committee, and there's been this nationwide mapping project for wireless connectivity. And it was proposed to be used for funding for the next 10 years to close the gaps. And the map is extremely erroneous. And so, but we don't want to delay by saying there'll be no funding until we do an entirely new mapping process. And so what the FCC is doing is relying on those areas that are clearly unserved. And then later, as we perfect the maps, they will move towards underserved areas. And let me explain why that map is so problematic. They use census districts, and a good example I got was in Bayfield, Wisconsin, community of just under 500 people year round, lots of visitors in the summer. They're in the same census tract as the Red Cliff Nation. And there is almost universal connectivity in the small city of Bayfield, where there's shops and restaurants and small businesses and hotels, and very, very little in Red Cliff Nation. But if they get counted as a served area of the state, it precludes for a decade the sort of federal resources that would help them build out. And so we got to solve problems like that. But think of how, the Bayfield School District, which serves Red Cliff and city residents and others in the area, they could really help clarify those maps as they struggle with this. So I'm just talk to your school districts about helping us get these grant programs right as we move forward.
Senator, if I could, I think you hit the nail right on the head. The census tracts, if there's one person, the way I understand the way those maps got populated was if one person in that census tract receives a broadband service of 25.3, then the whole tract is considered served. And the NACO tested app is actually helped to try to dispel that. But even here in Marathon County, we reached out to each of the school districts to help us provide, because they do have the knowledge of where there's issues in service for their students. And so we're working on gathering that information and looking to utilize part of the CARES Act dollars to actually increase some broadband connectivity into the really underserved areas of the county. But it's really problematic when the limitations that have been put on those dollars have tied the hands, at least from, and part of it is not the restrictions that the federal has put on, but some of the restrictions that the state has put on to us is that we have to have those funds identified and spent to receive reimbursement by November 5th. And so if there's any possibility of some flexibility there, the other municipality, we've even reached out to the local towns and other municipalities to share some of their unallocated CARES dollars to be able to do that in a meaningful way for the county. Because unfortunately, we had a study that was done 10 years ago on the connectivity in Marathon County. And at that point, we were told by the service providers, the ISPs, that you just wait, we'll get service. Service will be up and available. And here we are 10 years later, and the same areas that were underserved 10 years ago are still underserved today. So we're looking at trying to lead that rather than wait for the ISPs to lead it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One other aside, one of the things I've been pushing in that mapping project was just use of fleet vehicles. Like, why not have the U.S. Forest Service testing? What about the U.S. Postal Service? What about the Sheriff's Department? It's not without cost, but it's certainly, you're talking about vehicles that are covering area that that we need to have knowledge about. One other, I know we're running out of time, and I really respect your time, and so I'm going to toss out a really huge topic, and partly just because we know that not only are we facing a pandemic illness and the associated economic crisis, but we've learned a lot about the health disparities, racial health disparities, ethnic disparities, and we're dealing with a nation and localities organizing to fight racism. And I talked earlier today, and I have been over the last week with some of the leaders in Kenosha, but obviously there is municipal and local government related expense to keeping our streets safe, but also protecting First Amendment rights and cracking down on looters and those who are bringing violence to these activities. I wonder how that has impacted everyone on the call. If you just want to give me, it's a huge question in the last few minutes of our call, but please share any thoughts you might have.
Yes, we've seen a lot of activity on that front in recent months in Green Bay, as is true across the country, and been really proud of our local organizers and the way that our police have responded and facilitated a lot of those peaceful demonstrations. We had a few flare-ups, unfortunately, in Green Bay, but by and large, it's been a really powerful, peaceful movement here. But that doesn't come without a cost. So we've incurred a lot of overtime expense within our police and fire and within our Department of Public Works as well. Just making sure that those demonstrations are safe and well facilitated. So that's been a big hit for our budget here in Green Bay.
Yeah, very, very similar in La Crosse as well. We've been very blessed with having a great relationship with the marchers and the protest organizers and our police to keep everybody safe. And we've had, for the most part, peaceful protests. We have incurred overtime as well. And I don't know that you would call it necessarily a silver lining, but with Oktoberfest being canceled this year, we typically have a large overtime allocation of police that are planned for Oktoberfest. Well, since we're not going to be having Oktoberfest, that overtime is basically being shifted to these additional needs. So from an overtime standpoint, it's probably going to be a wash. Obviously, that puts a big hole though in our the economy with Oktoberfest. But for us, we've been just very proud and very pleased with the protests and people exercising their First Amendment rights, and hopefully, I'm knocking on wood that continues throughout the summer and fall as we have more of this. So we're doing everything we can to keep people safe and encouraging people to obviously share what they're feeling.
I think one of the things that I'm so proud of that has started to take place here in the county and also led by the mayor of Wausau was we're having discussions with community and having discussions and education on the board level of all of the issues that center around race. And so I am last week on Thursday, we had a 2-hour presentation to the board of directors, or the board of supervisors for Marathon County, along with the city of Wausau council on the distinction on implicit and explicit bias. And it was a great, and we didn't allow time for discussion because we wanted to have discussion in smaller groups. And so I've required that each of our standing committees, which makes up each of the board, we're having those discussions. And we've also had discussions externally with the WIPS group here in Wausau. So I'm so proud of the way that the discussions have centered, and I'm also very proud of the way that the individuals who have chosen to protest have done so peacefully and expressed their First Amendment rights. So we have had some increased costs, but at this point we have had nothing other than positive come out, than rather more than the negative.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Kim, you're certainly welcome to, it was sort of for the elected officials, but if you have anything, thoughts to add, you should feel free.
No, I just want to say thank you to them for how their communities have handled it. This is an extremely emotional and deeply moving movement that we are a part of. In schools, we have talked about the achievement gap for years and how that is really broken down into our Black communities are definitely struggling when it comes to the achievement gaps in schools. And now what we're seeing through the conversations that we're having regarding these protests is the gap is huge for academics and educational opportunities, but social and economical. And when you tie all of that back into what is happening with the pandemic, with lack of resources to schooling now, with lack of healthcare, access to healthcare now, all of these things are highlighting the structural issues that are so important as a part of the conversations that we need to be having. So just thank you for all of that. It starts to bring the big picture into a clear picture.
That's right. Well, I can't thank you enough for your willingness to spend an hour with me today. It's really helpful for me to hear, you know, whether it's sharing others' stories or just the experience on the ground in your communities. Thank you for your leadership. And as you know, feel free always to reach out to me or through my staff, especially as we get back to session and hopefully can press for something substantial to help out. All right. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Senator, for your leadership, and thank you for everything, and thank you for having us.
Thank you.